The town of Havenwood still felt the chill of Sarah's disappearance, even a decade later. It was a wound that refused to heal, a constant ache in the collective heart of the community. Sarah, a bright, bubbly 16-year-old with dreams as big as the summer sky, had vanished without a trace. One minute she was walking home from a friend's house, the next, simply gone. The initial investigation had been a whirlwind of frantic searches, desperate pleas, and agonizing uncertainty. Every corner of Havenwood had been combed, every lead followed, every possible suspect questioned. But nothing. No Sarah. No answers. Just a gaping hole in the lives of her family and friends, and a gnawing sense of unease that settled over the town. As the years passed, the investigation slowed, then stalled. The case went cold, filed away in dusty boxes in the police department's archives. Sarah became a ghost, a whispered name, a faded photograph on a missing persons poster that still clung stubbornly to a few lampposts. Sheriff Brody, a man weathered by years of service and etched with the lines of countless unsolved cases, carried Sarah's disappearance like a personal burden. He'd promised her mother he wouldn't give up, but the lack of progress weighed heavily on him. He often found himself staring at Sarah's file, rereading the same reports, searching for something, anything, he might have missed. Havenwood was a place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep. The idea that someone among them could have harmed Sarah, could have taken her away, was almost unbearable. Suspicion lingered, casting long shadows over familiar faces. Every anniversary of Sarah's disappearance brought a fresh wave of grief and renewed calls for justice. Candlelight vigils were held in the town square, prayers were offered in the church, and Sarah's memory was kept alive by those who refused to let her be forgotten. But as time marched on, hope began to dwindle. People started to accept the grim reality that Sarah might never be found, that the truth of what happened to her might forever remain a mystery. The cold case file gathered dust, a testament to the cruel indifference of time and the enduring pain of loss. Little did they know, the discovery of a simple, forgotten backpack was about to change everything. The hiker, a young woman named Emily, was an avid explorer of the woods surrounding Havenwood. She knew the trails like the back of her hand, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth a constant comfort. But this particular path, a less traveled one that wound its way towards the abandoned summer camp, felt different that day. An unsettling quiet hung in the air, broken only by the rustling of leaves under her boots. She rounded a bend, pushing aside a curtain of overgrown ferns, and there it was. A backpack, lying half-hidden beneath a tangle of fallen branches. It looked old, weathered, as if it had been there for a long, long time. Curiosity piqued, Emily cautiously approached it. The canvas was faded and torn, the straps frayed. It was clear this backpack had been lost, or perhaps abandoned, years ago. Hesitantly, she reached out and picked it up. It was surprisingly light, almost empty. A chill ran down her spine. Something about this felt wrong, like stumbling upon a forgotten secret. She decided to take it to Sheriff Brody. He would know what to do. Emily carefully carried the backpack back to town, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be connected to Sarah's disappearance? It seemed like a long shot, but something about the backpack's location, near the old summer camp where Sarah had sometimes volunteered, made her wonder. The summer camp had been a popular spot for kids in Havenwood. It had swimming, hiking, and campfires. But after Sarah's disappearance, the camp was never the same. People stopped going, and eventually, it closed down. Now, it was just a collection of dilapidated cabins and overgrown fields, a silent reminder of a happier time that was now lost. Emily arrived at the sheriff's office, the backpack clutched tightly in her hands. Sheriff Brody looked up from his desk, his weary eyes widening slightly as he took in the sight of her and the old backpack. "Sheriff," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly, "I found this near the old summer camp. I think it might be important." Brody took the backpack from her, his touch gentle, almost reverent. He examined it closely, his expression unreadable. He recognized the make and style. It was popular with teenagers 10 years ago. "Where exactly did you find this, Emily?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Emily described the location in detail, pointing out the landmarks and the overgrown path. Brody listened intently, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. He had a feeling this backpack could be the key to unlocking the secrets of the past, the key to finally bringing Sarah home. Or at least, to finally knowing what happened to her. He thanked Emily and promised to look into it right away. As Emily left the office, Brody turned to the backpack on his desk. It was time to reopen the cold case. Sheriff Brody carefully placed the backpack on the sterile metal table in the evidence room. The air hung heavy with the scent of disinfectant and the weight of unanswered questions. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves, his movements deliberate and precise. This could be it, the break they desperately needed. He had to be meticulous. He unzipped the main compartment, the rusty zipper protesting with a grating screech. Inside, he found a jumble of faded items. A couple of old textbooks, their covers dog-eared and water-stained. A half-eaten granola bar, now petrified and crumbling. A worn-out pencil case, its contents long gone. It was like peering into a time capsule, a snapshot of a life interrupted. Beneath the textbooks, he discovered a photograph. It was creased and faded, but the image was still clear enough to make out. A group of teenagers, smiling and carefree, posed in front of the summer camp's main lodge. Sarah was among them, her bright smile radiating pure joy. Brody felt a pang of sadness. She had so much life ahead of her. He carefully removed the photograph and placed it aside. Underneath, he found a small, zippered pouch. Inside, nestled amongst some loose change and a few forgotten trinkets, was a single, folded piece of paper. Brody unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a note, written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. "Meet me by the lake after campfire. J." Brody's heart skipped a beat. J, who was J? Was this someone Sarah knew? Someone she trusted? This was a new piece of information, a potential lead that had been overlooked in the original investigation. He carefully placed the note in an evidence bag, his mind already racing with possibilities. As he continued to sift through the contents of the backpack, he noticed something else. A single strand of hair, clinging to the inside lining of the bag. It was fine and dark, unlike Sarah's blonde hair. He carefully plucked it out with tweezers and placed it in a separate evidence bag. This could be crucial. If they could extract DNA from the hair, they might be able to identify who else had been in contact with the backpack, who else might have been involved in Sarah's disappearance. Brody carefully catalogued each item, meticulously documenting its condition and location within the backpack. He knew that even the smallest detail could be significant. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a surge of hope that had been dormant for years. This backpack, this collection of forgotten objects, might be the key to finally solving the mystery of Sarah's disappearance. He knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally on the right track. The first thing he needed to do was send the hair to the forensics lab. The evidence bag containing the single dark hair sat on Dr. Eris Thorne's desk, bathed in the cool fluorescent light of the forensics lab. Dr. Thorne, a meticulous scientist with a reputation for unwavering dedication, understood the significance of this tiny piece of evidence. It represented a glimmer of hope in a case that had long been shrouded in darkness. He carefully opened the bag, his gloved hand steady as he extracted the hair. It was fragile, almost translucent, but he could see enough to know it was of human origin. He placed it under a powerful microscope, examining its structure and characteristics. He knew that the success of the DNA analysis depended on the integrity of the sample. The process was delicate and time-consuming. First, he had to extract the DNA from the hair follicle, a process that involved carefully dissolving the outer layers and isolating the genetic material. Then, he had to amplify the DNA, creating millions of copies so that it could be analyzed. Finally, he would compare the DNA profile to those in the national database, searching for a match. Days turned into nights as Dr. Thorne worked tirelessly in the lab. He knew that Sheriff Brody, and the entire town of Havenwood, were waiting anxiously for his results. He felt the weight of their expectations, the burden of their hope. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Meanwhile, back in Havenwood, Sheriff Brody was busy pursuing other leads. He revisited the original case files, poring over old interviews and evidence. He tried to track down anyone who might have known Sarah, anyone who might have information about the note signed J. He interviewed Sarah's friends, her family, her teachers. He asked them about her relationships, her activities, her secrets. He learned that Sarah had been a popular and well-liked girl, but she had also been somewhat private. She didn't confide in everyone, and she had a close circle of friends that she trusted implicitly. The name J didn't ring a bell with anyone. No one could remember Sarah ever mentioning anyone with that initial. Brody wondered if it was a nickname, or if it was someone Sarah had met in secret. He knew he had to find out who J was. The waiting was agonizing. Every phone call, every knock on the door, sent a jolt of anticipation through him. He knew that the answer to Sarah's disappearance might be just a phone call away, just a piece of information that had been overlooked for years. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the call came. It was Dr. Thorne. His voice was calm and measured, but Brody could sense the excitement beneath the surface. "Sheriff," Dr. Thorne said, "I have a match." Brody's heart pounded in his chest. "A match to what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The hair," Dr. Thorne replied. "It matches the DNA of a known offender. A man named Richard Keller." Richard Keller. The name echoed in Brody's mind, a dark and unsettling chord. He remembered the name from the original investigation. Keller had been a suspect, one of many, but the evidence had been circumstantial, flimsy. He'd had an alibi, though a shaky one, and the police hadn't been able to make the charges stick. Keller was known to have a bad temper, and there were whispers about him having a history of harassing young women. "Tell me everything you know about Richard Keller," Brody said to Dr. Thorne, his voice urgent. Dr. Thorne provided the details. Keller had a prior conviction for assault and battery. He'd served time in prison, but had been released several years ago. His current whereabouts were unknown. He issued a warrant for Keller's arrest, charging him with kidnapping and suspicion of murder. The news spread like wildfire through Havenwood. The town was abuzz with excitement and anticipation. After 10 long years, it seemed like justice might finally be within reach. Sarah's mother, Mrs. Miller, was overwhelmed with emotion. She had never given up hope that her daughter would be found, but as the years passed, her hope had dwindled. Now, with the discovery of the backpack and the DNA match, a flicker of that hope had been rekindled. "They're going to find him, aren't they?" she asked Brody, her voice trembling. "We're going to do everything we can, Mrs. Miller," Brody assured her. "We're not going to let him get away." The search for Richard Keller intensified. Police officers fanned out across the region, following every lead, knocking on every door. The media picked up the story, and Keller's face was plastered on television screens and newspaper front pages. Days turned into weeks, and the suspense grew unbearable. Had Keller fled the state? Was he hiding out in the woods? Or was he still lurking somewhere in Havenwood, watching and waiting? The town held its breath, praying for a resolution, hoping for closure. The weight of the past pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. Everyone knew they were closer than ever to uncovering the truth about what happened to Sarah. And they knew that the truth, whatever it might be, would change Havenwood forever. Sheriff Brody sat in his office, surrounded by the files and photographs of the original investigation. He needed to understand why Richard Keller had been a suspect, and why the case against him had fallen apart. He reread the old interviews, the witness statements, the forensic reports. Keller had been working as a groundskeeper at the summer camp the summer Sarah disappeared. Several witnesses had reported seeing him talking to Sarah, but their interaction seemed harmless, casual. One witness, a young boy named Billy, claimed he saw Keller leading Sarah into the woods one afternoon, but Billy's testimony was dismissed as unreliable. He was a known prankster, and his story kept changing. Keller's alibi had been provided by his girlfriend at the time, a woman named Carol. She claimed that Keller had been with her the night Sarah disappeared, watching a movie at her apartment. However, Carol's alibi was weak. She was known to be fiercely loyal to Keller, and there were rumors that she was afraid of him. The forensic evidence had been inconclusive. There were no fingerprints or DNA evidence linking Keller to Sarah's disappearance. The police had searched Keller's apartment, but they found nothing incriminating. Brody sighed. It was a frustrating case, filled with unanswered questions and unreliable witnesses. He wondered if they had missed something, if they had overlooked a crucial piece of evidence. He decided to revisit the old witnesses, to see if their stories had changed over the years. He started with Billy, the young boy who claimed he saw Keller leading Sarah into the woods. Billy was now a young man, living in a neighboring town. Brody found him working at a local auto repair shop. "Billy," Brody said, "I'm Sheriff Brody from Havenwood. I'm reopening the Sarah Miller case, and I wanted to talk to you about what you saw that day at the summer camp." Billy looked nervous. He fidgeted with his hands, avoiding Brody's gaze. "I don't remember much," he said. "It was a long time ago." "I know it was a long time ago, Billy," Brody said gently. "But it's important. Sarah's family deserves to know what happened to her." Billy hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Okay," he said. "I'll tell you what I remember." He recounted the story he had told 10 years ago, but this time, his voice was steadier, his details more consistent. He said he saw Keller leading Sarah into the woods, and that Sarah looked scared. He said he heard them arguing, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. "Why didn't you tell us this before, Billy?" Brody asked. Billy looked down at his feet. "I was scared," he said. "Keller threatened me. He told me if I told anyone what I saw, he would hurt me." Brody felt a surge of anger. Keller had intimidated a child, silencing a key witness. This was a significant development. It strengthened the case against Keller, and it gave Brody a renewed sense of determination. He would find Keller, and he would bring him to justice. He also wanted to speak to Carol, Keller's former girlfriend. Perhaps time had changed her, and she would finally tell the truth. Carol, Keller's former girlfriend, lived in a small, run-down trailer park on the outskirts of Havenwood. Brody found her sitting on her porch, smoking a cigarette, her face etched with the weariness of a hard life. She looked nothing like the young woman in the old photographs, the one who had provided Keller with his alibi. "Carol," Brody said, "I'm Sheriff Brody. I'm reopening the Sarah Miller case, and I need to talk to you about Richard Keller." Carol's eyes narrowed. "I haven't seen Richard in years," she said, her voice raspy. "I don't know anything about Sarah Miller." "Carol, we know you provided Keller with an alibi the night Sarah disappeared," Brody said. "We know that alibi was weak. We also know that Keller threatened a young boy named Billy to keep him from telling the truth about what he saw." Carol's face paled. She stubbed out her cigarette, her hands trembling. "I was young and stupid," she said. "I was in love with him. I didn't know what he was capable of." "What do you know, Carol?" Brody pressed. "What really happened that night?" Carol hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Richard came to my apartment that night," she said. "He was agitated, nervous. He said he had an argument with Sarah. He wouldn't tell me what it was about." "Did he say where he had been with Sarah?" Brody asked. "No," Carol said. "He just said they argued. He stayed with me for a few hours, then he left. He told me to tell the police that he had been with me all night." "Did you believe him?" Brody asked. Carol shook her head. No, she said. I knew he was lying. But I was scared. He had a temper. I didn't want to cross him. Do you think he killed Sarah, Carol? Brody asked, his voice low and serious. Carol burst into tears. I don't know, she sobbed. I hope not. But I'm afraid he did. Brody thanked Carol for her honesty. Her testimony, combined with Billy's, painted a damning picture of Richard Keller. He was no longer just a suspect, he was the prime suspect. Brody returned to his office, his mind racing. He had to find Keller. He had to bring him in. He had to get justice for Sarah, and for her family. He looked at the map of Havenwood, focusing on the area around the summer camp. He knew that Keller was familiar with the woods, that he could easily hide out there for weeks, even months. He needed to come up with a plan to flush him out. He decided to organize a massive search of the woods, using tracking dogs and helicopters. He would leave no stone unturned. He was determined to find Richard Keller, and to finally solve the mystery of Sarah's disappearance. He felt the weight of the town's expectations, but he also felt a surge of hope. He was closer than ever to bringing Sarah home. Or at least, to bringing her killer to justice. The hunt was on. The massive search of the woods began at dawn. Dozens of police officers, volunteers, and tracking dogs fanned out across the terrain, their eyes scanning the undergrowth, their ears alert for any sign of Richard Keller. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their searchlights cutting through the dense canopy. Brody coordinated the search from a makeshift command center set up near the entrance to the summer camp. He monitored the progress of the search teams, analyzing the incoming reports, and adjusting the strategy as needed. He knew that Keller was a wily and resourceful individual, and that he would do everything he could to evade capture. As the search intensified, Brody delved deeper into Richard Keller's past. He learned that Keller had grown up in a broken home, that he had been abused by his father, and that he had spent much of his childhood in foster care. He had a history of petty crimes and run-ins with the law, but he had never been charged with anything serious until the assault and battery conviction. Brody discovered that Keller had a fascination with the summer camp. He had spent countless hours exploring the woods, fishing in the lake, and observing the campers. He seemed to have a particular interest in the teenage girls who frequented the camp. Brody also learned that Keller had a reputation for being a loner, an outcast. He had difficulty forming relationships, and he often felt alienated and misunderstood. He harbored a deep resentment towards those who he perceived as being more successful or popular than him. The question that plagued Brody was whether Keller was still in the area. He had been a drifter for years, moving from place to place, never staying in one spot for very long. It was possible that he had fled the state, that he was long gone. But Brody had a gut feeling that Keller was still nearby, that he was watching them, that he was waiting for an opportunity to strike. Brody ordered his officers to expand the search beyond the woods, to include the surrounding towns and villages. He alerted the local businesses, the gas stations, the diners, and the motels, asking them to be on the lookout for Keller. He also contacted the homeless shelters and the soup kitchens, knowing that Keller might seek refuge there. As the day wore on, the search yielded no results. The officers were tired, the dogs were exhausted, and the helicopters were running low on fuel. Brody felt a sense of frustration and despair. He had hoped to find Keller quickly, but it seemed like he had vanished into thin air. Just as Brody was about to call off the search for the night, he received a phone call from one of his officers. The officer said that he had received a tip from a local resident who claimed to have seen Keller near the old train tracks on the edge of town. Brody's heart skipped a beat. The train tracks. He knew that Keller had used to spend a lot of time there as a child. It was a place where he felt safe, a place where he could escape from the troubles of his life. Brody ordered the officer to proceed to the train tracks, and he assembled a team of officers to join him. He had a feeling that they were about to find Richard Keller. And he knew that when they did, the truth about Sarah Miller would finally be revealed. The hunt was far from over. The old train tracks were deserted, the rails rusted and overgrown with weeds. The air was thick with the scent of creosote and decay. The moon cast long, eerie shadows, making the scene even more unsettling. Brody and his team approached cautiously, their weapons drawn. They spread out, flanking the tracks, their eyes scanning the darkness. They moved slowly, deliberately, listening for any sound, any movement. As they neared an old, abandoned train car, they heard something. A faint cough, followed by the rustling of leaves. Brody signaled to his team to stop. He raised his hand, silencing them. He listened intently. The sound came again. It was definitely coming from inside the train car. Brody nodded to one of his officers, signaling him to take the lead. The officer approached the train car, his gun raised. He kicked open the door. Inside, huddled in a corner, was Richard Keller. He looked gaunt and disheveled, his clothes torn and dirty. He was shivering, despite the summer heat. He stared at the officers with wide, frightened eyes. "Richard Keller," Brody said, his voice firm. "You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Sarah Miller." Keller didn't resist. He simply nodded, his head bowed. The officers handcuffed him and led him out of the train car. As they escorted Keller to the patrol car, Brody noticed something lying on the floor of the train car. It was a small, wooden box. He picked it up and opened it. Inside the box, he found a collection of photographs. They were all of Sarah Miller. Some of them were taken at the summer camp, others were taken in town. There was also a lock of Sarah's hair, wrapped in a piece of ribbon. Brody felt a chill run down his spine. This was it. This was the evidence they needed to finally solve the case. He carefully closed the box and placed it in an evidence bag. As they drove Keller back to the police station, Brody couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to commit such a heinous crime. What had possessed him to kidnap and kill Sarah Miller? What had he done with her body? Back at the police station, Keller was read his rights and placed in an interrogation room. Brody sat across from him, his eyes piercing. He knew that Keller was a master manipulator, that he would try to lie and deceive his way out of this. But Brody was determined to get the truth. "Richard," Brody said, "we have a lot of evidence against you. We have your DNA on Sarah's backpack. We have Billy's testimony. We have Carol's testimony. And now, we have this box of photographs. It's time to tell us what happened to Sarah." Keller remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Brody waited patiently, giving him time to think. Finally, Keller spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said. "It was an accident." Brody leaned forward. "Tell me what happened, Richard," he said. "Tell me the truth." And so, Richard Keller began to tell his story. A story that would finally reveal the dark secrets of Havenwood, and bring closure to a community that had been haunted by Sarah Miller's disappearance for 10 long years. The truth was about to come out. Keller's story was chilling. He claimed that he and Sarah had been secretly meeting by the lake at night. He said that Sarah had confided in him about her problems at home, about her strained relationship with her parents. He said that he had tried to comfort her, to be a friend to her. One night, he said, they had been arguing by the lake. Sarah had accused him of being obsessed with her, of wanting more than just friendship. He said that he had lost his temper, that he had grabbed her, that he had pushed her. He claimed that Sarah had fallen, hitting her head on a rock. He said that he hadn't meant to hurt her, that it had been an accident. He said that he had panicked, that he had tried to revive her, but it was too late. He said that he had carried her body deeper into the woods, that he had buried her in a shallow grave. He said that he had been haunted by guilt ever since. Brody listened intently, his face impassive. He didn't believe Keller's story completely. He suspected that he was leaving out important details, that he was minimizing his role in Sarah's death. "Where is her body, Richard?" Brody asked. "Take us to her body." Keller hesitated. He said that he couldn't remember exactly where he had buried her. He said that it had been 10 years ago, and that the woods had changed. Brody didn't believe him. He knew that Keller was lying. He decided to bring in a team of experts to help them locate Sarah's body. He contacted a forensic anthropologist and a cadaver dog team. The next day, the search for Sarah's body began. The team of experts, accompanied by Brody and his officers, fanned out across the woods, following Keller's vague directions. The cadaver dogs, trained to detect the scent of human remains, led the search. They sniffed the ground, their noses twitching, their tails wagging excitedly. After several hours of searching, one of the dogs stopped near a dense thicket of trees. He began to bark and paw at the ground. The handler signaled to the team to dig. As they dug, they unearthed a pile of bones. They were human bones. Brody felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He knew that they had found Sarah. The forensic anthropologist examined the bones, confirming that they were indeed the remains of Sarah Miller. He also found evidence of trauma to her skull, indicating that she had died from a blow to the head. Keller's story was a lie. He hadn't simply pushed Sarah. He had killed her. Brody felt a sense of relief and closure. After 10 long years, they had finally found Sarah. And they had finally brought her killer to justice. He also knew that this was just the beginning. He still had to piece together the events of that night, to understand exactly what had happened between Keller and Sarah. He still had to uncover the truth about Jay, the person Sarah had been planning to meet by the lake. The investigation was far from over. But at least, they had found Sarah. And they could finally give her a proper burial. The healing could finally begin. The evidence room was filled with the remnants of Sarah's life, her schoolbooks, her photograph, the note signed J, the wooden box containing her pictures and a lock of her hair. Brody looked at these items, each one a silent testament to a life cut short. He needed to understand the full story, to fill in the gaps in Keller's confession. He returned to the interrogation room. Keller sat slumped in his chair, his eyes vacant, his spirit broken. Brody knew that he had to tread carefully. He had to gain Keller's trust, to coax him into revealing the truth. "Richard," Brody said, his voice gentle, "we know that you killed Sarah. We found her body. We have the evidence. But we need to understand why. We need to know what really happened that night." Keller remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said. "It was an accident." "We know it was more than an accident, Richard," Brody said. "The forensic evidence shows that Sarah died from a blow to the head. You hit her, didn't you?" Keller hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I hit her. But I didn't mean to. I just lost my temper." "Why did you lose your temper, Richard?" Brody asked. "What were you arguing about?" Keller looked down at his hands. "She said things," he said. "She said I was a loser, that I would never amount to anything. She said I was obsessed with her, that I was creepy." "Is that why you killed her, Richard?" Brody asked. "Because she hurt your feelings?" Keller shook his head. "No," he said. "It wasn't just that. It was more than that. I loved her, Sheriff. I really loved her. But she didn't love me back." Brody leaned forward. "What about the note, Richard?" he asked. "The one signed, J, who is J?" Keller's eyes widened. He looked panicked. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I never saw any note." Brody knew that Keller was lying. He decided to try a different approach. "Richard," he said, "we know that Sarah was planning to meet someone by the lake that night. We know that you were jealous. Did you follow her? Did you confront her?" Keller remained silent, his face pale. Brody waited patiently, giving him time to think. Finally, Keller spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, he said. I followed her. I saw her talking to someone by the lake. It was a boy. I didn't recognize him. What happened then, Richard? Brody asked. Keller hesitated. I confronted them, he said. I told Sarah that she shouldn't be meeting other boys behind my back. She got angry. She told me to leave her alone. She said that she never wanted to see me again. What did you do then, Richard? Brody asked. Keller's voice broke. I lost it, he sobbed. I snapped. I grabbed her. I hit her. I didn't mean to kill her, Sheriff. I swear I didn't. Brody looked at Keller, his face filled with pity and disgust. He knew that Keller was a deeply troubled man, a man who had been consumed by jealousy and rage. He also knew that he was responsible for Sarah's death, and that he had to pay for his crime. Richard, Brody said, I'm going to charge you with murder in the first degree. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Keller nodded, his head bowed. He knew that his life was over. He had finally confessed to his crime, and he was ready to face the consequences. The truth was out. And Sarah Miller could finally rest in peace. But the question of Jay still lingered. Who was he, and what role did he play in Sarah's final night? Brody couldn't shake the feeling that Keller was still holding back, that there was more to the story than he was letting on. He decided to focus on the note signed Jay. He needed to find out who this person was, and what role they played in Sarah's life. He showed the note to Sarah's friends, her family, her teachers. No one recognized the handwriting, and no one could recall Sarah ever mentioning anyone with the initial J. It was as if this person was a complete ghost. Brody decided to analyze the note more closely. He sent it to the forensics lab, asking them to examine the paper, the ink, and the handwriting. He hoped that they might be able to glean some clues about the author. The lab results came back a few days later. The paper was a common type of notebook paper, the kind that was readily available at any store. The ink was also a common type of ballpoint pen ink. However, the handwriting analysis revealed something interesting. The handwriting expert determined that the note had been written by someone who was trying to disguise their handwriting. The letters were carefully formed, almost too perfect. The slant was unnatural, and the pressure was uneven. It was clear that the author was trying to conceal their identity. Brody felt a surge of excitement. This was a significant breakthrough. It meant that Jay was someone who knew Sarah, someone who had a reason to hide their involvement in her disappearance. He decided to revisit the original suspects in the case, to see if any of them might have been Jay. He pulled up the files, reviewing the names, the interviews, the alibis. One name stood out, James Olson. James had been a classmate of Sarah's, and he had admitted to having a crush on her. However, he had an alibi for the night of Sarah's disappearance. He claimed that he had been at a party with his friends. Brody decided to track down James Olson, to see if his story had changed over the years. He found him living in a neighboring state, working as an accountant. Brody interviewed James, asking him about his relationship with Sarah, about his memories of that summer. James seemed nervous and evasive. He denied having any contact with Sarah after school let out for the summer. He insisted that he had been at the party with his friends the night she disappeared. Brody didn't believe him. He had a gut feeling that James was hiding something. He decided to ask him about the note. James, Brody said, I want to show you something. It's a note that was found in Sarah's backpack. It's signed, J. Have you ever seen this note before? Brody showed James the note. James's face paled. He stared at the note, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know anything about that note, he stammered. I swear. Brody leaned forward. James, he said, we know that you were in love with Sarah. We know that you were jealous of her other boyfriends. We know that you wrote this note. It's time to tell us the truth. James broke down. He confessed that he had written the note, that he had planned to meet Sarah by the lake that night. He said that he had been in love with her, but she had rejected him. He said that he had been devastated. However, he insisted that he had never met Sarah by the lake. He said that he had changed his mind, that he had decided not to go. He claimed that he had no idea what had happened to her. Brody didn't believe him completely, but he had no proof that James was involved in Sarah's death. He decided to let him go, but he vowed to keep a close eye on him. The mystery of J was finally solved, but the investigation was far from over. Brody knew that there were still secrets to be uncovered, that the truth about Sarah Miller was still lurking in the shadows. He wouldn't rest until he had found it. Richard Keller was tried for the murder of Sarah Miller. The trial was a media circus, with reporters from all over the country descending on Havenwood. The courtroom was packed every day, filled with Sarah's family, her friends, and members of the community who wanted to see justice served. The prosecution presented a strong case against Keller. They presented the DNA evidence, the testimony of Billy and Carol, and Keller's own confession. They argued that Keller had been obsessed with Sarah, that he had been jealous of her other boyfriends, and that he had killed her in a fit of rage. The defense argued that Keller's confession was coerced, that he was mentally ill, and that he had only acted in self-defense. They tried to paint Sarah as a manipulative and cruel girl, who had taunted and humiliated Keller. The jury deliberated for several days. Finally, they reached a verdict. They found Richard Keller guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom erupted in applause and tears. Sarah's family embraced, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. Justice had finally been served. Keller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He seemed to have accepted his fate. With Keller behind bars, Havenwood could finally begin to heal. Sarah's family could finally find some peace. The community could finally put the past behind them. A memorial service was held for Sarah in the town square. Hundreds of people attended, sharing stories about her life, her laughter, and her kindness. A tree was planted in her memory, a symbol of hope and renewal. Sarah Miller was finally laid to rest. Her grave was marked with a simple headstone, inscribed with her name, her birth date, and the words, "Forever in our hearts." Sheriff Brody stood by Sarah's grave, his heart filled with sadness and satisfaction. He had finally fulfilled his promise to Sarah's mother. He had finally brought her killer to justice. He had finally given Havenwood the closure it needed. As he looked out over the town, he saw a community that was stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. The tragedy of Sarah Miller's disappearance had brought them together, had taught them the importance of love, compassion, and forgiveness. The case was closed. The mystery was solved. The truth was out. And Sarah Miller could finally rest in peace. The healing had begun. Havenwood would never forget Sarah, but it would also never be defined by her death. It would be defined by her life, by her spirit, and by the enduring power of hope. Years passed. Havenwood slowly rebuilt itself, brick by brick, memory by memory. The scar of Sarah's disappearance remained, a permanent reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most idyllic communities. But the town also learned a valuable lesson, the importance of resilience, the power of hope, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Sheriff Brody retired a few years after the Keller case was closed. He had served Havenwood with dedication and distinction, and he had finally earned the right to rest. But he never forgot Sarah Miller. He often visited her grave, leaving flowers and whispering a silent prayer. He carried the weight of her memory with him, a constant reminder of the importance of his work. Emily, the hiker who had found Sarah's backpack, became a local hero. She was praised for her keen eye, her quick thinking, and her unwavering commitment to justice. She continued to explore the woods surrounding Havenwood, but she never forgot the day she stumbled upon that forgotten relic of the past. The experience changed her, deepened her appreciation for life, and inspired her to become a volunteer for the local search and rescue team. The abandoned summer camp was eventually torn down. In its place, a new community center was built, a place where children could gather, learn, and play in safety. The center was named after Sarah Miller, a lasting tribute to her life and her legacy. The Sarah Miller case became a symbol of hope for other families who had lost loved ones. It demonstrated that even the coldest of cases can be solved, that even the most elusive criminals can be brought to justice. It reminded everyone that it's important to never give up, to never lose hope, and to never stop searching for the truth. The case also highlighted the importance of DNA technology in solving crimes. The single hair found in Sarah's backpack had been the key to unlocking the mystery of her disappearance. It was a reminder that even the smallest piece of evidence can be crucial, and that science can play a vital role in bringing justice to victims and their families. As for James Olson, he lived a quiet and unremarkable life. He never married, and he never had any children. He was haunted by guilt and regret, knowing that he had played a small role in Sarah's tragedy. He often visited her grave, leaving flowers and whispering apologies. He never told anyone about his secret, but he carried it with him until the day he died. The story of Sarah Miller is a story of loss, of grief, of pain. But it's also a story of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always light. And that even after the longest of winters, spring will eventually come. The lesson of Havenwood is that even when faced with unimaginable tragedy, a community can heal, can rebuild, and can emerge stronger and more united than ever before. And that the memory of those who have been lost will live on forever, inspiring us to be better, to be kinder, and to never give up on the search for justice. The end.